Hello, students. It's time for another video lecture. Today we're going to be talking about the essentials of micro practice. And so bear with me as I like my music here, but I'm going to turn it down for the purpose of our time together today. As always, I would encourage you to do your readings before you get to class, and so we can participate in the wonderful discussions that we will be having. So with no further ado, let's get into our discussion for today. All right, as you can see here, we have these concentric circles, and what I want to talk a little bit about is each one of them. And so on the larger end, or the big circles, we're looking at the big ideas, and then we're going to look at the things that are important to know, and then also what we want you to take away and make sure that you incorporate in terms of being able to endure and understand. So in general social work practice, we recognize and understand that we do our work in the context of systems theory. We look at it, the eco perspective. So the environments that our clients live and survive in are very important. And we also dig deeper into the micro, meso, and macro systems. So those are the big ideas. So think about those as global, overarching types of things we want to talk about. As we look at what's important to know, then this is the generalist methodology in terms of the 7 phases of doing social work with your clients, regardless of whether they which particular system you're addressing. These will always be the steps. So you always need to be able to engage with your client. So how do you start the conversation? How do you connect with other human beings? And we'll spend some more time in class practicing on that. After we've done the engagement and the initial contact pieces, then we need to also recognize that we need to assess. And assessing is basically being able to gather the information about what's happening for your client from their perspective so that we can start to look at the next steps. Once we gather that information, we move into our planning mode. So we start to really look at what is it that our clients want, what is it that they need for their own selves to be successful as they work through the difficulties that they might be encountering. And then we develop together these interventions. So what are we going to actually do that is going to put things in place that will bring about the kind of changes that we need to see in our systems or in the families that we're working with. So we'll put these interventions through the auspices of treatment plans or goals with various tasks that everyone will need to be responsible for. We will monitor those tasks during that intervention period, and then we'll do an evaluation. So the evaluation piece is important in that evidence-based practice is a key part of social work. So when we think about the evaluation piece, we need to figure out, did the thing that we tried work or did it not? And if it didn't work, what were some of the barriers that caused it to not work? What can we do differently next time? Or are there ways that we can modify this intervention so that it could be successful with the families that we're working with? And then finally, we get to termination. Again, social work is about planning social change, and so moving through these steps, we do realize that we have a limited amount of time that we will spend with our clients at any given point in time. And so how do we then actually start to close up that relationship? How do we start to shut down and prepare clients to actually go it on their own? And then follow up. So checking back with clients at a specified period of time after the interventions have taken place to see whether things are still in place. So those are some of the essential pieces that you'll need to understand and know as we think about social work. Finally, we want to also then be able to incorporate understanding of these social work roles, what our responsibilities are as clinicians and as agents of change, how to maneuver relationships, really understanding that the culture and diversity are key. So really trying to understand those particular aspects as we move forward with our work, which means that basically in some communities, some particular techniques that we might want to use may not be effective, but be very effective in other communities. So actually recognizing the importance of diversity and culture. Also remembering our own values and ethics in terms of what the social work NASW Code of Ethics says that we need to be doing, and then our own personal ethics as human beings and as good people. Recognizing our own challenges and recognizing the challenges of our clients and the strengths, as well as making sure that we're always communication. Remember, whenever you're in the room, You'll always be held to a higher standard because you're the professional. What we're looking at here now we're looking at different roles that you will find yourself playing in their social work as a social work practitioner. There will be times where you'll work as a counselor, you'll be an educator, you'll be a broker. There are times you'll just do case management. Sometimes you'll mediate, you'll facilitate, you'll manage, you'll initiate. So these are the roles that you will find yourself shifting from as you move throughout your role as a social worker. You also need to recognize that as we start to look at moving through those particular phases that we just talked about, those 7 phases, then we also need to recognize that we need to look at the step 1, which is engagement. So how do we enter into the conversation? How do we enter into the relationship? How do we enter into the setting with the clients that we're about to work with? And so there are some preparatory skills that you'll need to be looking at and trying to understand, and we'll do some of this and we'll talk about a little bit more in class. But doing some review, exploring, thinking about questions, looking at some consults, talking to other people who have been social workers for a while in terms of what they might do, in terms of how they might intervene with the family, arranging your time, making sure that if language issues come up, that we do have interpreters. Big piece that we need to really keep in mind is that of empathy. And empathy is the ability to really try and understand where your clients are actually coming from. So it makes a huge difference in terms of whether engagement works or whether it doesn't. Self-exploration, so you will be hearing things or you'll be experiencing things as you're talking with your clients that will cause you to reflect on your own personal situation or to have your own personal reaction to that. And sometimes it might be at odds with what you think or how you operate as a human being in the world. So recognizing those things are going to be very important as you move into your work with your client. Being centered, being organized, having your thoughts and feelings and sensations all kind of in one place, so as you go and connect with your clients, things won't be awkward. So also recognizing in that client-worker relationship that verbal information is very key, but also nonverbal information is very key. So as a social worker, you'll need to be able to know how to read these particular cues that you pick up from people. You need to be naturally warm in terms of how you connect with people, showing that empathy and being genuine. You need to bring your full self to the conversation, to the interview that you're having with your clients. Also recognize and respect that at all given times, clients have the right to self-determination. So that can mean that I can have this brilliant idea about what my client's going to need so that they can resolve this issue that's going on in their lives and bring their families back together. I can see it all day long. But if my client sees it and decides that they don't want to do it, then that's the client's prerogative and that's their right. And that might be a struggle for a lot of times newer social workers to recognize that sometimes clients just are not in the same place that you are. They're not ready to accept the change that's there before them. And so they do have the right to say, no, I'm just not going to do this, even though it could have disastrous consequences for themselves or their families or other loved ones. So keeping those things in mind are going to be very important. And then goal number 1 is to always look at what are ways that we can look at empowering our clients so that they can actually have the best particular life that they can. So that empowerment piece is very big because we're not giving things to them for them to look for resources or handouts, because we're not going to always be there. So it's important for us to understand the importance of empowering people so that they can find solutions to their own issues as they come up, in the absence of us professionals who have a limited time with them anyway. So keeping those things in mind. All right, so when we're sitting in our interview or getting ready for our interview, we've got to look at why are we here? What's the purpose of the interview? How much time do we have? Do I have 30 minutes with this client? Do I have an hour? Do I have 2 hours? Are you going to be able to explain your role? Because oftentimes you'll be meeting people for the first time and they'll have no idea who you are, what it is you're about. They could be coming from another country. They could never have received any type of formal services from a social service agency before. So it's important for you to always explain your role in terms of why you're here, what it is you're doing. And also soliciting feedback from the client also. Those are things that are going to be very useful to you in your interview process. Starting where your client's at. Now, that can be a difficult piece for people to sometimes wrap their heads around, because a lot of times newer social workers will come into a process and then say, well, here's the time that I have, and so these are the things that I need to get accomplished as it relates to the time that we have today. Well, that's kind of a false start. Basically, it's looking at where the client is and being able to engage with them. you may have only an hour to work with that particular client. And you may have already talked to them about the things that you want to cover before they even get to your office or before you get to their home. But if that client's emotional, if something has happened to them that day and they're in a bad place, we need to pay some attention to what's happening for that client in that particular moment, because there's no way we can move forward with getting our objectives met in terms of the things that are on our list to do until we recognize where the client's at and acknowledge that with some form of empathy. So again, those engagement activities will include how you greet people, paying attention to body language, paying attention to facial expressions, vocal tones, things of that particular nature. Also informing people about what the expectations are. Sometimes clients might have the thought that you're there to do X, Y, and Z, and the reality is that's not why you're actually there. So being really clear about the services that you're going to be able to provide, what you're going to offer, are going to be very important. And then, you know, of course, as always, there's the dreaded paperwork that needs to be done, because documentation is a very critical part of the work that we do. When we're doing the actual conversation, when we're doing the interview, when you're there with your client, you need to also be looking at the verbal responses. So it's about, how am I going to respond to the things that I'm actually hearing? Sometimes we can do some simple encouragement. So really looking at the strengths that your clients bring to the table. You know, they haven't always been in this situation. They haven't always had these kind of difficulties and traumas in their lives. So there have been times where things were actually doing well. So being able to find strengths and being able to do encouragement with your clients is going to be very important. Being able to rephrase. So after the client has talked and shared pieces with you, you're summarizing in your head, what is it this person is saying to me? And then somewhere during the conversation, you want to do a rephrase and say, so I hear you saying, and then basically give back to that client what you think that they hear. It shows that you're interested. It also demonstrates that you're listening to what clients are having to say. This reflective responding. So responding to what it is people are saying and reflecting on those particular dynamics. Seeking clarification. So, you know, if someone says to me, you know, I'm working with a kid, my mom is just stupid. I don't know what that means. I can make some assumptions about what that means, but so I'll ask for clarification from that client about what do they mean when they say that. Really looking at the whole interpretation piece, as well as providing information, are all going to be important things that you'll need to do as you're starting that engagement piece in your micro work, social work practice. The assessment. Again, gathering your information. It's an ongoing process from the day that you meet the client until the day that you're closing up the case. So you're always gathering information about what's happening for your client and whether the services that you put in place are actually working. So do you need to know who your client is? Sometimes that can be very confusing. There are often times where you're doing work with families, and who's your client? You may be a school social worker, and your client might be the kid who goes to the school, but there are other dynamics that are in the family. And so it's about really trying to understand from that standpoint, who actually is my client? Is it the kid from the school who I work with every day, or is it that family in some context in terms of that? So those are things that we'll spend some more time talking about too. The client is in the situation. So are the situations, is it a macro level event that's happening? Is it something that's more community based? Is it something that's dug into a policy? Or is it something that really it looks at and challenges diversity? Life cycle. So in your human behavior and social environment course, you'll be learning about these life challenges or these life cycle changes. So from birth to death, we all do different pieces of transition. And so really understanding where your client is in that continuum makes a difference in terms of how you assess and what kind of services you actually provide. Recognizing what the barriers and obstructions are. What are the things that will get in the way of your client being successful? Those are the things that you need to be able to identify, and your clients can be a great source of information in terms of helping you get to that particular place. Being able to understand the client's problem or have them identify what's going on and what their needs are. Also recognizing their strengths. Again, recognizing that people may come to us in various shapes or forms and sizes or with various types of difficulties that they might be encountering, but they all have somewhere in their lives some strengths that we need to be able to build on. And then ethical decision making. And so when we talk about ethics, are we making decisions that are fair, that are just, that are right for our clients? What are the motivations for why we're doing some of the things we are? Are there conflicts that come up in terms of those situations with my clients? So, you know, if I've got a client who discloses that they have hurt a child. What do I do with that? Because, you know, I know what the law says that I should do, but then the other reality is that I may run the risk of damaging my working relationship with this client, but there's an ethical set of principles that I have to abide by, regardless of what that means for that client working relationship. So those are all things that you're going to have to become familiar with as you move through this particular process. We cannot overemphasize enough the importance of emphasizing client strengths, recognizing clients' behaviors, acknowledging the good things that they do, looking at the personal qualities that they bring into the situations. And they can be small things. They can be things like, you know, dressing their kids nicely, or actually having different things that they do in the context of their day. They're just nice, genuine things that they do. Those are all sources of strengths for those clients. Looking at the resources that they have that exist within their family or that they've been able to access on their own. Those are all very important pieces that we need to keep in mind. And then also looking at the resiliency, looking at those risk factors and protective factors. What are people able to do? And when we think about resiliency, think about situations that are pretty dire, where you look at the circumstances and go like, wow, there is no way in the world that this client will ever be able to be successful given the barriers and given the things that are in front of them. And yet somehow they consistently rise to the occasion and they continue to do well in terms of the things that are put in for it. That's an example of resiliency. And what are the protective factors? What are the things that are built into that particular client's atmosphere or their family system or in any other systems that will actually be an asset to them and to help them as they move forward? Here's a scenario that we'll come back to in just a little bit. I'll pass it out, but basically I want us all now to kind of think about this situation that's going to be happening for this particular client. Then I want you to think about, given some of the things that we've talked about earlier in terms of what social work do in micro practice, what would you do and how would you end up getting the information that you need to move forward with this particular family? You're going to also need to know and answer some of these questions in terms of what do you need to know before you proceed. So what I'll probably do is break you guys up into groups at your tables, and then you'll kind of work through some of these particular questions and then come up with a scenario about how you would actually then move forward with terms of getting the information that you need from the client based on the circumstances that we just shared with you earlier. We'll probably get some volunteers or myself or someone will just kind of volunteer to be in that particular role and to give you a chance to do a little bit of practice around some of the things that you're wanting to do. So this brings to a conclusion my particular portion here of this video lecture, but basically want to make sure that you do your readings and then to also look at this video as many times as you need to so that you can have a better sense of what's happening when we're looking at engaging in micro practice. And so I will see you all in class and hang in there. Take care. Bye.